Hey, it's Lauren. On the show today, I spoke with Irene Krasnoff, who lives in Dallas, Texas. We had such an interesting conversation. Irene really knows a lot of things about a lot of different subjects. And, she gave me so many, directions I could have gone into, but I really stuck to the topic at hand, which was about how to market your business to diverse cultures, as well as how to be aware of how to handle cultural sensitivities. So these are some really big subjects, I know. We did get into, the nitty-gritty in some cases. We did talk about, basically growing and progressing and how to educate yourself. And we also talked about the importance of, building authentic relationships on social media. And then we also ended the hour with talking about the 7 pillars of repivoting your business, which was essentially, do you have these 7 things in place to have the most successful business possible? So this episode is just chock full of value. I know you're going to love it. So settle in and enjoy. This episode's been brought to you by the Raw Spirit team. Growing your business is just the beginning. Too many business owners try to grow their business on their own. They spend countless hours testing out and investing in hundreds of strategies, all with the aim of building their business. Without support, someone helping to guide you and cheering you on, motivation starts to go down. Your passion starts to decrease. You start running out of money and losing faith in your business and yourself. The Raw Spirit team is a supportive community filled with expert programming, up-to-date training, guest experts, mentorship, and like-minded business owners. This isn't another community and another strategy. This is a serious and supportive community of business owners focused on supporting each other and building their business. You are welcome here. My guest today is Irene Rivkah Krasnoff, who lives in Dallas, Texas with her husband Neil and her 8-year-old daughter Braha. Irene is the founder of Sapir Management Group, LLC, a digital marketing and business consulting agency with a focus on sales via authentic social media relationships. Her worldwide view has been shaped by a childhood that involved living in 5 countries across 4 continents, thanks to her father's thirst for a better life, which led him to apply for a British Commonwealth scholarship back in the 60s. Irene's childhood was spent moving from country to country due to her father applying for teaching positions at various international universities. Irene grew up in England, Ireland, Bangladesh, Nigeria, and the United States. Irene's international background cultivated her love for languages. She speaks English, Bengali, and Spanish. She can read and write Hebrew and French. Irene knows a few words in Igbo, Russian, Mandarin, and Hindi. She is joining me today to talk about how to market your business to diverse cultures, as well as how to be aware of how to handle cultural sensitivities. And we're going to talk about the 7 pillars of repivoting your business. Thank you, Irene, so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this podcast.
I'm so excited. And, just for our listener at home, I did leave out a few things in Irene's bio because it was really extensive and super interesting. So I'm sure we'll be able to catch up with Irene, in her own words on that. But I mean, what an interesting childhood and life you've had so far.
Well, thank you. I think that international background has really shaped how I interact and engage with folks. And I've always had an interest in different cultures, different religions, food, ethnicities, and so forth. And that's the passion that I bring into my business. And I'm all about communications. So for me, marketing communications is key, and how you relate to individuals from where they are. Although I specialize in social media, a strong part I believe that's overlooked, and the murder of George Floyd here in the United States reflects, is that we don't talk about a very important problem and issue that not only is facing the US but also abroad, and that has to do with racism and cultural sensitivity, and it goes on both sides. So that's something
Yeah.
that I feel passionate about, that I'm looking forward to speaking about in this podcast.
Yeah, me too. And I'm definitely going to, we will go there a little bit later, because I think that
Hmm.
sometimes there's a lot of fear about doing or saying the wrong thing. And I think that could
Hmm.
be holding back people from
Hmm.
communicating, authentically. So we'll
Hmm.
definitely get into that. But before we do, can you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to start your management group?
What inspired me to start my management group is something very, very personal, and that is becoming a mom. So motherhood didn't come easy for myself and my husband. We had 8 years of struggle with infertility, and I had to give up a corporate career. I was working for IBM, enjoying the travel and the consulting. And
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, that came to an abrupt halt in 2008. So during that time, I then decided, well, I need to focus on building our family. Corporate career just doesn't make sense. And
Mhm.
so after we got pregnant in 2011, I then was faced with the decision, what do I do with my career? Because I knew after my baby was going to be born that I would need to continue to work. So I
Yeah.
explored the world of how to work from home. And I did that with a number of trial and error. I knew nothing about social media, a zero zilch, except, yeah, I had a Facebook account. Now, obviously, I would post cute things.
Yeah.
Um, and then once I started building that business from working from home with, offering sales and marketing services and helping moms to build their business, I became very proficient with social media, in particular with organic reach, because most newly starting entrepreneurs, they just don't have the cash to invest in Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads or Instagram ads.
Yeah.
So I learned everything I could about organic reach. And so it's that passion that inspired me to start my management agency. And I also didn't want to give up the corporate world as well.
Mm.
So I decided to incorporate as part of a business that not only offers services for online entrepreneurs, but also for mid-sized companies and large companies as well, because there's now, I'm seeing a great interest in how to market your services online, given the unfortunate incidents with COVID.
Hmm.
More and more companies have been forced to go into the online realm, and a lot of sales and marketing is now happening online. So I think it's very aligned. My agency is very aligned to that, and my passion for me is communication, especially online communication, and also bringing in the culture and the diversity piece as well.
I really am having to stop myself from talking to you about organic reach and the lack of organic reach nowadays. So,
Yeah,
definitely maybe that'll be another conversation because I just feel
sure.
like there's a whole rabbit hole that we can go down, but I'm really going to keep us focused today on the subject
Hmm.
at hand. So, you sort of alluded to it just there that, your focus is really on, sales and authentic social media relationships. So, I really want to know, how do you define an authentic social media relationship, and
Hmm.
you know what do you think about social media in general? Is it authentic or is it not?
Wow, that is an excellent question and quite deep.
Yeah.
I love the question. So, the way that I define authenticity is not using a formula. Some
Mm,
folks are under the impression that if you share every little detail about your personal life, that's being authentic.
right.
But it's not necessarily being authentic, because there's some stuff that is just TMI as it relates
Yes.
to social media.
Yes.
So when I think about authenticity, and this is something I communicate with my clients,
Hmm.
I it's about building genuine relationships, taking the sales component out of the picture,
Mm,
because obviously we're in business to solve problems, and yes, we do want to make money, and we can't just overlook that fact. but we can't make it about the money. It's about the transformation. So the authentic piece is about having real conversations, treating each person in social media as a human being, which is so hard to do because when you don't see someone face to face, like in a Zoom call, it's easy to write something without thinking about how the person on the receiving end is going to view that message.
Yeah.
So when I say authentic relationship, I mean taking the time to really get to know somebody buddy,
Mm.
and speaking in their language, but also interjecting who you are and your own language, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, it's so interesting that nowadays, people in sales, marketing, that everyone seems to be aware that we need to give value and build relationships before we
Hmm.
pitch. And,
Hmm.
there's a time where it wasn't like that. It was just sell, sell, sell. It was, listen to the radio, listen to the TV, and you get all these advertisements. But now it's really about cultivating those relationships and aligning, with brands that have the same values as you, and, that are showing up in the world the way that you want to, and kind of aligning with that. And
Hmm.
I love that, we're in that world now. I love that people are
Hmm.
understanding that, yeah, money is important. I mean, obviously we need money to put roofs over our heads and eat and all these things. But at
Hmm.
time, you don't want to, undervalue what you're selling, or you don't want to go against, I guess, your own values. And yeah, it's about aligning those relationships, I guess.
Exactly. You hit exactly. It's about that alignment of relationships
Yeah.
and doing business and working with clients who make the most sense for you, given your personality and given, like you said, your value system. There's got
Yeah.
to be a natural connection. And I think just by being real, you attract the individuals who are aligned with you.
Yeah.
And I think because the law of attraction, that's something I'm big on, which is yet another different topic.
Totally, girl. Yeah, it is. But I
Yeah.
mean, it comes down to the abundance mindset. Can you comment on
Mhm.
that for a minute?
Sure. Yes, it definitely comes down to the abundance mindset. And that is, there's an entrepreneur who talks about coming from a place as if you have $1 million in your bank account. Because let's say, for example, you have $100 or £100 in your bank account, or whatever the Australian currency is. Excuse my ignorance.
Dollars. We've got dollars.
Dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you focus on the dollars and what you don't have, then it's very difficult to attract the money. And the abundant thinking, I believe, from my perspective, based on everything that I've absorbed, is that you present, you know, your own value,
Hmm.
and independent of what's in your bank account, the value of what you have to offer doesn't change. And the
Mm.
right people, when you charge the right price, will be attracted to that. And they'll be willing to pay that price because they know the value of what you have to offer. And
Yeah.
it's often in terms of thinking in terms of what would a millionaire do? What would a millionaire say? And adopting those mannerisms and internalizing it. So that's how I see abundance.
I like that a lot. I think if you're coming at the world with that perspective, you almost seem less desperate for somebody's dollar. You know what I mean? Where
Hmm.
you're like, I already got
Yes,
my million in the bank, so now I can just be of service.
exactly. That is exactly what I was trying to say. And when
Yeah,
I heard that perspective from an entrepreneur,
I like
uh,
it.
it just totally made sense with me and resonated. And so I've seen a difference in my business by adopting that mindset.
You're really giving me so many different paths we can go on, and I'm really forcing myself to stay on topic. But what I will
Mhm.
say though is that, you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about pricing what we're worth. And I
Mhm,
think that, very often, I'll use this as an example. It sounds like a ridiculous example, but I was looking for yoga pants or something like that online, right? And there were all
mhm,
these cheap versions. And I thought, I don't want to buy a cheap version. I'm willing to spend a bit more money to get something that's of higher quality. And very often that's the same with the
mhm,
marketplace. That, if
mhm,
you're undermining yourself or
mhm,
undercutting yourself, undervaluing yourself, yeah, there might be people that will buy from you. But if you price yourself for what you're worth, people will also
mhm,
buy from you because there's a whole other market of people that understand that you get what you pay for. So something
mhm.
that's too cheap or perceived as being too cheap sometimes subconsciously can be seen as
Mm.
not being as good of quality or as much value. Would you say?
Yes, I would agree with that definitely, for sure, because the price does speak to the value of something. Now, there are obviously different price points for different individuals based on where they are,
Yeah,
and you would price accordingly. Because obviously, not everyone can afford a $15,000 mastermind.
yeah,
So you want to have different offerings, like different things for different folks,
yeah, yeah.
so that you're reaching a broad audience. And to bring it back to the whole issue of sensitivity and cultural sensitivity, I think that money sensitivity plays a big role in it as well.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
yeah, because when we think about specific racial groups and minorities, we make certain assumptions about their prosperity level
Mm,
based on the injustices and inequalities that do exist, and they are real. And so I think from a sensitivity standpoint, you also have to watch yourself and watch the assumptions that you make about your prospective clients or customers, because your assumptions could be what ends up destroying your business. Now, I know I'm exaggerating here.
no, but it's true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
it
love that.
could harm your business. So,
Yeah, and a really great book for our listener at home on not making assumptions is called The Four Agreements. And I don't know, have you read that, Irene?
I have not, and actually, I'm going to write that down
It is
because I
so
would love.
good. It's basically
Yeah.
talking about if you live by these four agreements, you'll have the best quality life. And it's about being impeccable with your word, not taking things personally, always doing your best with changes every day, and not making assumptions. And I love what you said, that is that essentially, if you're determining, whether or not a customer, potential customer, is going to say yes or no to your product, you're probably making an assumption. And one
Mm,
thing that I like to teach as well in my membership and when I'm dealing with clients is that you never want to say no for the customer. And sometimes it's really easy to do. I remember I was DMing some people on my Instagram account to just say, hey, like touch base with them and let them know about this membership that I launched. And I was nervous to do it, I've got to say, because I didn't really like to pitch that way. But at the same time, these people are following me for whatever reason. They like my content. And then I had that voice in the back of my head, which was saying, don't say no for your customer. Allow your customer to do that. And it's exactly what you're talking about. When you're making
mhm,
an assumption as to whether or not somebody can afford something, you could be shooting yourself in the foot if you're deciding that, based on appearance alone or based on whatever.
mhm.
I mean, we've all seen, well, most people have seen Pretty Woman. Hello.
Yep.
She went into the shop with hundreds of, thousands of dollars to spend, and they made an assumption about her income level and didn't serve her. And look how that turned out, right? So,
Right, exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And I think that that is a very important piece, because there's certain assumptions, and then going back to the cultural sensitivity thing, that we grow up with certain biases and assumptions based on about people who are different from us, especially if you have not interacted with them. And some of the assumptions, for example, I'm guilty of one of the assumptions, and that is, when I started my business as a mom, yes, my money was limited. And so I made the assumption that all the other moms out there have a limited income. And that's not
Right.
necessarily true, because there are
Right.
plenty of moms who are prosperous. And I think the same thing applies when you're talking about different cultures, different groups, especially if you have a perception that certain ethnicities, because they tend to financially, suffer, they don't
Mm,
have the wherewithal. But there are plenty of of wealthy African Americans, Africans, Hispanics, indigenous people, and
Yeah.
hugely prosperous. And they could be your ideal client, they could be your customer or your client if you just put aside all of the assumptions and you really checked in on assumptions. And I keep going back to George Floyd because obviously that has affected our country in a
Yeah.
massive way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it really showed it. I think it demonstrated for everyone that we have our implicit biases, and those implicit biases they do come into our business as well. And it's something
Yeah.
that we need to check in on all the time. To
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so I understand that you've made friends across all different religions, ethnicities, lifestyles, political
Mm-hmm.
beliefs. You've lived in multiple different places around the world. So
Mm-hmm.
let's get into the subject at hand now. Now you've just alluded to you're talking a lot about biases that we have. So how do we kind of get clear on our biases? You were just mentioning that it's something that we need to check in on all the time. Is that
Mm-hmm.
about self-awareness? How do we develop that? Do we have biases that we don't even realize we do have, for example?
That is a really good question, and that's something, to be real honest with you, that I also grapple with. And I think it comes with having a greater level of self-awareness. And my biggest dilemma is a question is, how do you inspire somebody to develop self-awareness? Because some individuals, they're set
Yeah.
in their ways and they're not going to change. So
Yeah.
it's best to leave them alone. On the other hand, there are individuals who are very, very open to checking in on their individual biases. And I believe that by virtue of being an entrepreneur, you have to do self assessment because your business success is contingent on examining your limiting beliefs and all the beliefs you have. And that
Yeah.
also includes your biases in terms of who you're serving. So you gotta take a look at, and it takes conscious effort that
Yeah.
you gotta ask yourself. When I am in Facebook, for example, and I see somebody live streaming, who do I tend to listen to? Let's say there are two individuals, and I don't like to bring in the race, and I don't like to define people by race. Let's say,
Mm,
for example, you see somebody, and let's see, she's 25 and she is white, and she's got this great charismatic presence, and she's talking about, let's say, organic reach, Facebook organic reach. Then you got somebody else who is African American. You have not very familiar with that, with seeing a lot of African Americans, and she's talking about organic reach. And who are you going to pay attention to when Facebook notifies you that here are two folks that are talking about these topics? And sometimes on a subconscious level, I don't think it's done out of maliciousness or hatred or anything. We
yeah.
tend to gravitate toward folks that we're familiar with. That's just human nature.
Right.
So it takes a lot of conscious effort to focus on the topic versus focusing on what you see on the screen. Because
Mm.
surprisingly, somebody who may not necessarily fit the credible expert might end up giving you nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like you said, when you're faced with making that decision, just get aware of, what is driving you. Are you looking at how many plays one of the videos has had? Are you looking at, maybe the sense of authority one of the speakers is giving over the other one, right? Is there
Mm-hmm.
something there that's forming your decision, or is it something else that you're going with what might feel familiar? Do you think that you know, I think sometimes, we need to be careful of how we phrase things, but at the same time, I'm only phrasing things the way that I know best. So,
Mm-hmm.
let's just keep that in mind. When you have different cultures, so I'm a Caucasian woman in my late
Mm-hmm.
30s, well, not that late, but pretty late 30s.
I'm much older than you, but
um, do you think that it's sometimes challenging for us to be able to connect with people of different cultures? And if we're not of a same culture, do we need permission, I guess? Like, do we
Mhm.
understand how different cultures are showing up in the world? Are we the best fit for them, for example?
Hmm. That's a very interesting question. And if I'm not answering any aspect of your question, let me know.
Yeah.
Um, I think, I mean, based on my personal experience, growing up in different backgrounds, I tend to interact and engage with an individual
Yeah.
based on not their culture, not the color of their skin, but the conversations we have, what we have in common, and by genuinely being interested in that person and asking that person, questions. And the where you're from question can be something pretty sensitive because when you think about the anti-immigration stances in different countries, to ask a question of someone who looks like me can be pretty sensitive. So, but I think if you come from a genuine place and getting to know the person by asking initial questions, oh, where do you live? Or, where do you work, kind of thing, then the conversation transpires naturally to saying, I'm just out of curiosity, where are you from, kind of thing, and it evolves naturally. Now,
Mm.
there's a book that I read is called The Elegant Warrior, and she says, as a lawyer, one of the questions that she used to ask when she was a trial attorney was, well, tell me what you would like me to know. Now, that was very powerful because it
Mm.
gives the power in the individual and it removes that discomfort, like saying, oh, I noticed you're from China, but where in China are you from? But you could say, just out of curiosity, and tell me what you want me to know. Where
Right.
in China are you from and what brought you to the US?
Yeah.
That has a
Okay.
different feel to it. But I think it's just getting to know people just naturally. Like, what brings
Yeah.
you to this networking event? Or why are you interested in Facebook organic reach? And then,
Yeah.
and then just going according to where the conversation leads you.
Yeah, because yeah, it does. And I think, well, what I got out of that was basically that if your values align, if your mission aligns, if you're serving somebody, where do they want to go and grow? Can you help them get there? That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is kind of like it can define a person if they want to be defined by that, I suppose. But
Mm-hmm.
it's about, what do you and I have in common? Well, we both agree with the law of attraction. We both
Mm-hmm.
understand the abundance mindset. We both recognize that Facebook organic reach is declining. There are things that we
Yes.
have, maybe in common values, or that we have similar interests in mind that aligns us, even though we're both different cultures, right?
Right, exactly. It's about finding commonalities and
Yeah.
just going from there. And then as you get to know a person better and you become friends, then eventually that person will open up to you and share some things. And when that person shares certain sensitive things about encountering racism or maybe, God forbid, being sexually assaulted,
Yeah.
then it's better to just sit and listen because automatically when something is brought up and we don't feel comfortable with it, our tendency is to say something, and oftentimes it's best not to say anything
Mm.
but to listen empathetically and say, I'm so sorry you went through this. Is there anything that you would want me to do or say? And often that time that means being vulnerable, and that often means saying, I don't understand what you're going through. Help me to understand. And I think that makes a big
Yes.
difference.
Yes. Can you comment at all, Irene, about sensitivities in relation to pronouns and gender identity? Because in a
Mhm.
way, it seems to me that it could be slightly similar to cultural sensitivities. Do you think so?
Yes, I definitely think that there is that similarity with cultural sensitivity, with that, with being referenced to in terms of gender. Do you want to be known as him, her, hit? All of those
Yeah.
things. I think it does matter, and being aware of that. But ultimately, it means creating an environment where a person who's transgender feels comfortable in saying, "Hey, I
Yeah.
want to be referred to as she."
Yeah.
And I think it's up to you to create that environment. Definitely there are connections. It goes across everything: disability, gender identification,
Yeah.
everything, sexual orientation, same thing. I mean,
Mm.
there's a lot of crossovers and similarities, and multiple layers. Being African American and being gay, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
double right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So let's go back to cultural sensitivities for a minute and the role that,
Sure.
being aware of cultural sensitivities can play in sales and marketing. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes, and we've all seen scenarios of this happen, sometimes businesses are making decisions that actually really offend certain cultures, or they're not giving
Mm-hmm.
credit where credit is due, maybe for like maybe a way a music or a hairstyle or a food or whatever has evolved from a culture, for
Mm-hmm.
example. So how do you kind of get aware of, you know the place of cultural sensitivity in your marketing, in your sales?
That is a really good question. I think if you're really, really fortunate to have individuals spell that out, um, you as a business owner have a responsibility to listen. And I keep thinking about corporations, and I'm going to tie
Yes.
that into entrepreneurs and solopreneurs in a minute.
Yeah.
Like, there's been so many number of culturally insensitive products, and I've blanked out on a lot of it because I tend to push it away. Some certain companies, let's go with the Aunt Jemima brand because that's the one thing that
That's what
comes
I
to.
thought of when you said that,
Yeah,
actually. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I remember that vividly. Now, for
Yeah. Yeah.
several decades, we never once gave it a single thought as to how racist the imagery is, referring back to the days of slavery. But now we
Yeah.
have that greater level of awareness. So the company changed and pulled that, and I think that's huge.
Yeah.
So that level of awareness is so could take decades or it could take a short period of time. Now, I want to bring it to the entrepreneurial world because that's where most of us are at. And I'm assuming
Yeah.
most of your listeners are in the entrepreneurial field. And I'm
Yes.
not going to mention any specific influencer business owners out of respect for their names. And
Yes.
you might surmise that. Um, when the whole stuff in the US was happening over George Floyd, and this was in a paid group and a paid program
Yeah.
with several thousands in investment.
Yes.
Some of the folks who in that group were African American, Hispanic, and other minorities. Felt like they needed to say something because it was weighing on them very heavily.
Yes.
With the emotions of anger, fear, concern, and also the implicit racism and their feelings of being treated that way within the business world was affecting them. So they said something, and the owner shut down all the comments saying that this is going to be for business related topics only.
Yeah.
Now, that's an example of not being culturally sensitive. And I don't think that that specific business owner was anyway intentionally racist. It came across as that
Yeah.
because of shutting down conversation. So you got to be in tune with what's going on, even though that might not be within your frame of reference. Taking the time to
Yeah.
understand, especially if you understand who your customers are, and you got to really do an in-depth analysis of that. There's Facebook insights. There's also insights from when folks buy from you that you got to use that information to figure out what's the composition and how should I speak to them, and even to the point of looking observing what conversations are going on in social media so that you know exactly how to speak with them. And someone speaks to you and they're a customer, you got to listen to them, even if it's a
Yeah.
topic you're not comfortable about. And
Yeah.
that was the biggest fatal mistake that this entrepreneur made, which I'm sure affected her business.
Yeah.
So it just takes a lot of listening and a lot of self introspection. And I think you got to force yourself to do that, even if you're not willing to do that.
Yeah, because I mean, it's sometimes a difficult journey, isn't it? It's hard
Yes.
to admit these things about yourself if that's something that's true for you.
Hmm.
Uh, but at the same time, it's how you advance and how you evolve as a person, or as
Hmm.
an entrepreneur, as a business person. So do you think that there's maybe lack of knowledge that people have these biases, and yeah, and then they play out and they make decisions, and then it's like, wait a minute, wow, in the situation that you're alluding to, for example, that's what happened
Yes.
there.
Yes, there's definitely a lack of knowledge, and that
Yeah.
lack of knowledge stems from our educational system. And I'm not sure how neighborhoods and communities are organized in Australia, but certainly in the US, we have separate pockets of communities.
Yes.
So, and that affects how your worldview. So, for the average wealthy individual who's Caucasian, most likely they're not going to interact with African American communities or Chinese communities um, or Hispanic communities or Indian subcontinent communities.
Yeah.
And so, and then you are also based on how history is taught. You also have certain assumptions based on what you learn in school, based on what you observe around your environment, how
Yeah.
adults speak,
Yeah.
and you internalize those so that when you come to become a business owner and you're sheltered from the world where somebody deals with racism and you're told that, like, I'm using us as a point of reference because that's what I'm familiar with,
Yeah.
that when you learn that in 1964 with the civil rights era, all of everything ended and now we're an equal society. When you have that perspective, it's very difficult to understand when someone says that I just had a racial encounter.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in 2020, you're like, what? People still think
Exactly.
like that, but I think it's what you were talking about before, where sometimes people aren't self-aware. They're not recognizing that, this is something that they were taught or have,
Mhm.
decided is a truth for them for whatever reason, and they might not be aware that it's something that
Mhm.
actually is not okay.
Right, exactly. And I want to point to something that I think is just absolutely amazing. That was so heartwarming when I witnessed this. When there were several women, Caucasian business owners who just came out and they said in their own Facebook groups on their profile that I don't know this information. I want to learn. Can you teach me or can you direct me to the resources? And I think
Yeah.
that was a beautiful, wonderful thing because what that did was that level, and it goes back to the conversation we had about authenticity earlier on.
Yeah.
That level of genuine authenticity is what enabled her clients to connect with her. And I personally connected with her as a business owner because here she was willing to say, I want to learn. And I looked to myself and I said, am I willing to be brave and to say that publicly? And to be real honest with you,
Yeah.
no. So that takes a lot of courage. And I think
Yeah.
that is to be commended. And we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I don't, and in the US, books about racism, just the sales went up really, really high because people wanted to know. And that is so encouraging to see. So
Yes.
even though I'm talking about building awareness about something that's negative, I also want to acknowledge the positive as well.
Of course. And I mean, that's where progress happens.
Hmm.
It's when people make these decisions, when, we're, things like George Floyd's death and, the Black Lives Matter movement all around the world. Like when these things are brought to the forefront of our mind, then it allows people to change. It allows them to identify their own weaknesses. It allows them to help the world progress because it's
Hmm.
overdue, I think.
Yes, yes, it is way overdue.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think I'm pretty helpful because I tend to think about how far we have come, even though we have a long way to go. And I feel pretty helpful that change is just right around the corner. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect world, but I think we'll be at a much better place in the future relative to where we are at today, or where we were a year or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So that's pretty encouraging to me.
Yeah, so let's talk about how far we've come, because bringing it back to sales, I think that sales, marketing, copywriting, there has been a lot of changes and a lot of shifts in the last few years. So, do you want to focus or do you want to comment at all on maybe some of the growth or progress that you've seen? Or is it as simple as, companies like Aunt Jemima recognizing that, what they've been doing for so long is not okay and revamping and basically you know acknowledging that and then moving forward.
I think it's a combination of all of the above. And did you want me to speak from the perspective of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs? Or
Yes.
yeah,
Oh, however you want.
okay. I
Yeah.
want to speak to the perspective of entrepreneurs and
Yeah.
solopreneurs
Yeah.
because in the world of sales and marketing, and I think we all are aware of the shifts that has happened. I mean, take for example with Facebook, and I talk about Facebook a lot and organic reach a lot. So a few years back, as way back as 2016, when organic reach was dwindling, it just seemed like we didn't have the control. But now we hear all the changes that Facebook has given us a little bit more control, and it's true, we do have a little bit more control in terms of who we see and insights into why somebody's engaging into our post, which is a different topic.
Yeah.
Um, so there are all these changes, and then you're also seeing a shift in terms of the value in social media, and it's not just perceived within the online world, but also within companies are starting to see the value of social media. And I think a lot of that's necessitated, it was due to COVID, because more and more we are in social media and this is our only way to develop community.
Yeah.
So then we have a variety of engagements and interactions. I think the change for now is that it's become a highly saturated environment. It was saturated 2 years ago, 4 years ago. Especially now, it's super saturated because
Mm.
every conceivable business, the brick and mortars now,
Yeah.
are going into the online world. I see it all the time in my business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
As they
so
should. I'll just say
they
that.
should.
As they
Yes,
should.
they should. Exactly, as
Yeah.
they absolutely should.
Yeah.
Because the way that we engage has so much changed. Now, I'm a Gen Xer, so I am aging myself here. And, and I remember a world pre-internet.
So do
We
I,
did
girl. So do I.
not. And and before it was all the face-to-face meeting in coffee shops and so on, and networking events and so on and so forth. Now everything is literally done, and I was looking for my phone, I can't see it. Everything is through the mobile. I mean, you
Yeah.
are literally Facebook, Instagram, mobile, and websites got to be mobile friendly. Your
Yeah.
business has to be mobile friendly. It's like we are in living, breathing social media.
Yeah.
So now I think the context has changed in terms of marketing. And I know I'm going on because it's a passion of mine.
It's all great though, and it's important what you've just said.
Yeah,
You've just given people some checklists. So if they're not
yeah,
mobile friendly on all those
yep.
platforms, they better be
hmm
checking that out.
And furthermore, the one thing, because there's so much of it. You could be in Snapchat, you could be in Instagram, you could be in YouTube, you could be in Facebook, you could be podcasting,
Yeah.
you could be on LinkedIn, and you have got to focus because I think nowadays we are seeing more of a distracted environment because of social media.
Yeah.
So, in order, and this is a free tip for everyone, focus on one platform and do it really well. Two, if you must, but you got to do those two really, really well. And then use the other social media platform as a way to spread your message. And I think in from a strategic perspective, I think it's changed from the viewpoint of how do we build engaging content, how do we grab the attention of our consumers, how, and how do we keep them coming back to experience their brand, especially when their choice is so much.
Yeah. And, it kind of goes back to the beginning of the conversation. We didn't really get too much into it, but, when you're getting to know somebody on social media through, you're building your authentic relationships, I think one really hot tip as well is that you don't need to tell them your full story right away. I don't need to be like, hi, Irene, let me tell you about the last 20 years that I've been in business right away. No, I just
Mm-hmm.
need tell you maybe one little thing, and then you can get to know me as we build our relationship and our journey together.
Exactly, and that goes to the trend that we're also seeing is more and more of the storytelling using
Yes.
Instagram stories, using Facebook stories. I think the movement is shifting in that direction
Mm.
in terms of your ability to tell a compelling story that draws your audience in, like you said, without oversharing. and spilling too much information.
Yes, exactly. It's funny because sometimes people on, building a personal brand or entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, they don't want to share all these personal parts of themselves, but it's like you don't need to. You can still be authentic and vulnerable and keep it within the frame of your business.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Especially when you talk about lessons learned. That there's the 7 things that I learned that I spent 5, 6, 7 years figuring out. I'll give it to you, and within 6 weeks, you'll have it down.
Mhm.
Just building it down and then saying, look, this is what I learned, and this is what you don't want to repeat, kind of thing. I think that for me is a
Yeah.
level of authenticity. You wouldn't see that typically in companies admitting that they made mistakes.
Yeah, no, that's right. I remember when, I was talking about tips and tricks on how to go live on Facebook. And one of the things I said, I think it was in that video anyway, was about, how when I first went live, I went live in the wrong channel. And, that's what that's what happens. Now I know to be
Yep,
really careful next time I'm going live on something. So, I mean, that's where people get to build relationships with others. They get to know you a little bit more based on, the challenges or the, trials and tribulations you've gone through, overcoming adversity and coming out the other end.
exactly.
So I do want to talk to you about the 7 pillars of repivoting your business.
Mhm.
Before we get to that, though, I do want to make sure that, do you have any tips or tricks on how people can educate themselves about being a little bit more culturally sensitive? I know you did talk about, before, that there are different resources. I know that you talked about that book that you mentioned. I can't, The Elegant Warrior, did you say? And
Mhm.
maybe is that how you get started? Do you ask people around you that are of different cultures? Do you,
Mhm.
or is it up to you to educate yourself and not continuing having asked somebody else, hey, you
Yeah.
be a different culture to me, can you educate me? That doesn't seem fair.
Right. It's interesting that you asked that question because I talked with my African American friends, and I asked them, how do you feel when someone says, do you can you guide me to the right resources, can you teach me? And their response has been, look, we're really exhausted, we're emotionally exhausted, we're worrying about our sons. No, we don't
Yeah.
have the emotional energy to teach you. It's There's something called Google, and that was my friend's very words. There's something called Google. Use
Yeah.
it. Now you can find a lot of resources through Googling. Now, I have 3 books that I can recommend.
Perfect. And we'll put a
Uh,
link to this in the show notes as well.
there's one book that I'm going to recommend. I'm not necessarily crazy about. That's an entirely different topic for another conversation.
Yeah.
And that is called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Have you heard about Robin DiAngelo?
No, I haven't.
Okay. She is a professor and she is a diversity trainer.
Okay.
And she talks about the discomfort that Caucasians face when they have to go to a diversity and inclusion training. And I don't blame them because the definition of racism, usually when we think racism, we think about the person who uses the N word or who's a white supremacist or a KKK. But she talks about the subtle things that we pick up. I mean, it's not just only for Caucasians. We all have our biases, but the
Yeah.
biases that we pick up, and also the privilege in that that if you're a Caucasian, you're not going to suffer the racism that someone like me or an African American would face. So she talks about that in her book. It's
Mhm.
a really good book for gaining perspective into why individuals feel uncomfortable when the topic of racism is brought up. So that's a really good reference
All
point.
right.
Yeah. The other one that's very popular with companies like Aetna, for instance, is using this book in their diversity training. It's called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. Have you
Okay. I think
heard of
I've heard of
him?
it. Yeah.
Yeah, very popular in the US. I'll
Yeah.
definitely share the links to that.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. Now, I know, I suspect the audience that you have is international, but
Yep.
I think this book could be also good in terms of the Jim Crow laws. It's called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
All right.
Those are the three books I would recommend. And of course, what I would say is on a personal level, and you can do this through Facebook groups, is to look at the different groups and the members and friend individuals who are different,
Hmm.
and then strike a friendship, engage with them in their profile, get to know them. And then when you become quote unquote friends, then you can talk to them about issues of what's going on in the US or racism.
Yeah.
And they will people are open and they will open up and share. It just depends on how you do it.
Yeah, I like that. And then again, going back to what you talked about at the beginning, which is just watch your own behavior. See the
Mhm.
judgments, see the decisions that you're making, and maybe you'll see
Mhm.
that there's some room for you to grow and progress.
Mhm. Exactly. And then another recommendation that I would have is that because a lot of us, we have Instagram accounts, Facebook accounts, YouTube, LinkedIn, is that go through your face news feed and ask yourself, who am I drawn to? Who am I most inclined to listen? And see what comes up for you.
Yeah.
That could be
Yeah.
an educational moment as well.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. All right. Well, we don't have too long left in the show, but we
Mhm.
definitely have time to talk about the 7 pillars of repivoting your business. Now, I know that
Yes.
that includes creating a distinct and diverse culture. So let's get into what this is all about. Irene, take it away.
Sure, I will take it away with the 7 pillars. Now, this applies.
I feel like we need some kind of like da 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 da, like music or
Yes,
something.
music.
Yeah,
Yes, the
yeah.
7 pillars.
Yeah, the 7 pillars of repivoting your business.
No, this comes straight from corporate world,
All
and
right.
basically thinking from the corporate perspective, and this applies for any business. There are 7 components of a business that ensures the health of your business for perpetuity for life, let's say,
All right.
until you're ready to sell, or be done with your business, whatever comes first.
Yes.
uh, so obviously product development, so that's one pillar.
So would product be also services?
Yes. When I say
Yeah.
product, it includes services as well. Digital, non-digital product services.
Yeah.
So that's number one. So number two, you got to have technology. By technology, I mean all the different apps that you use in your business, from Active Campaign for email to your SAM card to take payments, your Google Drive, your website,
Yeah.
platform, all of those things goes under the umbrella of technology. And then there's that. And then within technology, I also have different processes, from when you receive a client to all the way to providing services, to how you market, to how you track your finances, all that good stuff. Kind of the processes go into there, because some processes involve technology automation, so that
Yes.
goes in there.
Which is good.
Then,
Automation is very good when you get
yeah,
it
it's
set up.
very good, except I don't advocate automation when you're communicating with
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah.
Better to have an authentic message. For I don't like ManyChat and all the bots. That's not.
Yeah. I don't like I'm not a fan of bots either. Like I get that
Yeah,
people do it, but yeah.
yeah. So that's
It's
pillar
another
number two.
subject.
Another subject, exactly. Um, Pillar number three is finance. You got to look at your business finances I would say every month at least. So that
I know
includes
some
what's
people look at them every day.
every day. Some people look at it every day. Ideally, you want to look at it every day. But if you cannot master that, then at least a minimum of a month. And
Yeah.
that is being tracking what's going out, what's coming in. It's as simple as that. What's going
Yeah.
out, what's coming in.
Yeah.
Then you got your sales pillar, and the structure, your sales funnel goes into that.
Mm,
And then complementary to that is marketing. Marketing and sales go hand in hand. That
yes.
is, okay, what are your marketing strategies? Are you using offline, online, social media, email, and all of that good stuff?
Yeah.
And then what I refer to as distribution. And that distribution ties into the sales and marketing. In the fact is, how are you getting your products out there?
Right.
What platforms are you using? Your past clients, referrals, all of those things are distribution. Your website goes into there as well.
Yeah.
Different ways through which an individual enter into your own world, which is your business. Well, your business shouldn't be your world, but you know what I mean. Because
Yeah.
you are your brand with your business, and it's almost like you have your own world, and you're letting people into your world. So that's distribution.
Yeah.
Then there's communication. Communication involves not only with your customers, but also with anybody you hire, whether they are your employees or whether they're your
Mm.
contractors, your VA. That's communication. And to
Yeah.
create, and that's where the culture piece comes in, with your core values, your philosophy, your mission. All of that comes under communication, because how you make the folks who work for you feel is just as important as how you make your customers feel. Because if you don't have a happy independent contractor or employee, it's going to be hard on your business, and
Yes.
costs it costs as much to rehire somebody at almost as much as it costs to acquire a brand new customer. So that's
Wow.
communication. And then I think those all the seven I've covered. I feel
Yeah.
like I left something out, but I think that's list.
Well, I mean, the thing is that they're so important, but within them, it's so deep. Like you could just go, down the
Yeah.
tech route forever, down the communication route forever. So it's nice to
Mm-hmm.
have those, pillars, that understanding that, you
Mm-hmm.
need to be paying attention to all of these different things within your business. Would you say they're all equally important?
Yes, they're equally important. And the one
Yeah.
piece that I wanted to add, at the foundation of all the seven pillars, your mission, your vision, your values, your philosophy, all goes and weaves all the way through all of those channels. And all of those
Right.
seven channels would have to communicate with each other or work with each other.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Because you wouldn't be making decisions that go against your values or your mandate or your mission statement or whatever. You wouldn't be
Exactly.
aligning yourself with a service or a brand or a communication or a marketing strategy if it didn't
Hmm.
feel, connected
Hmm.
with what your business is all about, which comes back down to, being authentic. So I guess that comes down to, in a way, like understanding what your business is about before you almost get started, or coming back and reevaluating that as you progress and change as well.
Exactly. It definitely goes down. It always, you got to understand exactly what your business is about, who you are, what you're about, because you're the brand.
Yeah.
And then it ties into how you shape those seven different pillars that we talked about.
Yeah.
Now, in our case, as business owners, we are the one who manages all seven of those, and some of those we will
Yeah.
outsource. But when you look at it at corporate level or at large company, they got different divisions for each of the seven. And so they have a
Right.
bigger challenge in how to communicate. At least for us, it's relatively easy.
Yeah, which is why you want to make sure that if you are, listening to this from a corporate perspective, could happen, I guess, that you want to make
Hmm.
sure that everybody on your team is in the same, like
Hmm.
facing in the same direction. One
Hmm.
thing that I thought was really important too, to just bring up one more time, was that, when you have all these things in place, when you have your purpose and your values and your mission statement, it's okay to be like the Aunt Jemima brand and to reevaluate if what you've been doing isn't working, and to change
Hmm.
and to progress, would you say, and to refresh yourself?
Yes, you definitely want to refresh,
Yeah.
especially when you're no longer relevant or you're holding values that are harmful to both your customers as well as your employees, like in the case of Aunt Jemima brand, or in the
Yeah.
case of the business owner who wasn't listening to their clients
Yeah.
who are off. And it doesn't have to be about race. It could be women, it could be somebody with a disability, somebody with a different gender, with a different sexual orientation.
Yes.
By yeah, if you have been guilty of shutting them off and creating a bad reputation, you can refresh yourself. There's always hope to refresh and have a new beginning.
So, all right. Well, listen, Irene, that's been such a great conversation. We're just nearing the end of our chat, if you can believe it. I love talking
Wow.
to you. Maybe we could have you back on the show sometime and we can actually get into our conversation around organic reach and how to stand out from the crowd. I think that would be really great if you're up for it. Um, If there is anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about, are you able to bring that up now?
I think we covered a lot, and I really
Yeah,
enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
me
And
too.
to the listeners, thank you so much for your time. That really means a lot. So, no, I think we covered a lot of ground, and definitely I would love to be back.
Fabulous. So, how can people get a hold of you? And I'll put all your links, your contacts, your socials, and everything like that in the show notes for sure. But if somebody at home is thinking that, they're understanding, what you're speaking about, they really want to get involved with the kind of work that you
Mhm.
do. Are you taking on new clients at the moment, or is there a particular way that people can connect with you that you prefer?
Oh, yes. I think the easiest way to connect would be through Facebook. And it's under my name, Hebrew name, Rivkah, Rivkah, Krasnoff, Kras, S in Sam, N as in MC, F as in Frank, F as in Frank. If you enter that, you'll get all of my information, including my Facebook group, which is called Total Digital Transformation.
Ooh, good name. Total
Yeah.
digital transformation. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Irene, and until next time.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please do leave us a review where you listen to your podcast and share it with your friends. New episodes every Monday.